Hello everyone, welcome back to another chess video. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most important tactics in the game of chess, the pin. We'll go over what a pin is, some different types of pins, and some puzzles to make sure we have everything down. So without further ado, let's begin today's lesson. So first off, what is a pin? A pin is whenever either player can't move a piece or would end up in a worse position by moving that piece. Let's break this down starting with this first part. We know that you aren't allowed to make a move that would put your king into check. So if you have a piece that is blocking an enemy piece from giving check to your king, your piece is no longer able to move. And we can see that in this position here, because this black knight is blocking the white bishop from giving check to the black king. And this is a very common and powerful example of a pin. Remember, pins occur when you can't move a piece. So if you can't move something because it is protecting your king, that's a pin. Now let's look at the other half of my definition, when either player would end up in a worse position by moving a piece. Sometimes your pinned piece, and that's the piece that isn't able to move, isn't going to be pinned to the king, which means you are able to move it. However, there's going to be times where moving that piece would put you in a bad spot. For example, if your opponent had an attack on your queen that was blocked by the pinned piece, then moving the pinned piece and letting your opponent take the queen would put you at a big disadvantage. And we can see that in this position here, where black is blocking white's attack on the black queen with a knight. So if black decides to move their knight away, maybe to here, then white is just going to go ahead and capture the queen, and black is going to be at a big disadvantage. Like the last example, one of the common patterns you'll see with pins is that pins usually occur when one of your lower value pieces is blocking an attack on a higher value piece. Let's take a look at an example to see what I mean. In this position, we're white, and we can see that if our knight on e4 wasn't there, black's bishop would be attacking our rook. Let's take a moment to think about the value of the pieces in this position. We know that the bishop and the knight both have a value of 3 points. So if black's bishop captures our knight, and we take the bishop back, neither side would have an advantage. However, if we move our knight out of the way, our rook, which is worth 5 points, can get captured. And even if we capture the bishop back, black would have an advantage of 2 points. This makes this position an example of a pin, where the knight is pinned to the rook. So far, we've seen that pieces can be pinned to other pieces, but they can also be pinned to threats. Let's take a look at another example. In this position, white is very close to having a checkmate. If this knight wasn't there, then the queen could capture on h7, and supported by the bishop, this would be checkmate. This means that if the knight moves, white wins. And this is an example of a pin to a threat. In this case, the threat of checkmate. Before we look at what you can do with pins, let's have a quick quiz. I'm going to show you a few positions, and it's your job to find the pin. You don't need to figure out any moves or anything, just where the pin is and what is getting pinned. In this position, white's bishop is pinning the black knight to the black king. We know that because black's knight can't move anymore, because if it moves, it will have check on the black king. In this position, white's queen is pinning black's bishop to the black king. And just like last time, this bishop can no longer move, because if it moves, white would have check on the black king. This position is a little bit more tricky than the other ones, but in this position, white's rook is pinning the black knight to the black queen. In this position, black's knight is able to move, but if it moves out of the way, we're going to take the black queen, and that's going to leave us with an advantage. Now that we understand what pins are and can identify them, let's look at what we can do with pins. The most common way to use a pin is to PPPP, or put pressure on the pinned piece. Let's look at an example. In this situation, we have a simple pin with this black knight being pinned to the queen. Remember, in a situation like this, the knight doesn't want to move, so if we can attack the knight with a lower value piece, black will have no choice other than to let us capture it. In this position, we are able to do just that. By moving our pawn to e5, we can attack the knight, and since it doesn't want to move, because if it does move, we're just going to go capture the queen. Next turn, we're going to just capture it and have an advantage. The other part of putting pressure on the pinned piece is forcing trades by not letting your opponent move the piece you want to capture away, but that's a little bit more complicated, so we'll do that some other time. For now, let's do some example puzzles like before. For these ones, you'll need to find the pin and figure out how you can put pressure on the pinned piece to capture it next turn. In this position, the white bishop is pinning the black rook to the black king. So we're going to put pressure on it by moving our pawn to f4. Because now black's rook can't move because it's pinned to the king. So next turn, whatever black does, we'll just capture the rook and we'll be ahead of material and ready to win the game. In this position, white's bishop is pinning the black knight to the black queen. We're going to put pressure on the black knight by pushing our pawn to g5. Now, black's knight can still move because it's not pinned to the king, but if they move it, or if black moves it, we're going to go and capture the queen, so they're probably not going to move the knight. So next turn, after they make some random move, we're going to go ahead and capture the knight, and we'll be ahead in material. In this position, the white queen is pinning the black knight to the a7 square. And this is an example of a pin to a threat, because if the black knight moves, then a white can capture on a7 and they'll have checkmate. This makes the knight the pinned piece, so we can put pressure on it by attacking it with a lower value piece, which in this case would be the pawn that's on a4. By moving it to a5, the knight still can't move, so next turn we'll just capture it. So say black makes some random move, then we can go ahead and capture the knight and gain material. That's going to be it for today's video. Pins are one of the most common tactics in chess, so even if you couldn't get the answers for the puzzles in this video, you'll definitely have more practice in the future as you play more games. With that being said, great work, and I'll see you in the next video.